In this video, I'll cover the basics of template use in Home Assistant. I'll cover what templates are, how to create them, when and where you might want to use them, and provide a few real-world examples of how I use templates in my own Home Assistant. Hi, and welcome to Resin Chem Tech. Now, I've titled this video as a Home Assistant 201 video instead of my normal 101 videos, and that's just because the concepts presented here require that you have a little bit of experience with Home Assistant. You don't need to be an expert or a coder or a developer, but you should at least have an understanding of basic concepts such as entities and states, and it would help if you understood a few things such as if, then, else. But even if you've never written any code before, don't worry, these concepts aren't hard to grasp. First off, understand that templates can be used in a lot of different ways in Home Assistant. The template integration allows you to create entities which get their values based on other entities or data. Now, the documentation page here shows you the types of templated entities that can currently be created. And I'll provide a link to this page down in the video description. Do note that templating can also be used in things like triggers, conditions, and actions of an automation or script. But this video will focus on creating templated entities. I'll show a couple of quick examples of using templates in an automation towards the end, but once you understand templating, it's pretty easy to move from creating template entities to applying templates in automations and scripts. First, why might you want to create a template entity? Well, there are many reasons and uses, but one common reason is to convert existing sensor values to a more readable or desired state. For example, maybe you have a wind sensor that indicates the current wind direction in degrees. That might not be real handy on something like a dashboard. Well, you can easily create a template sensor and convert the wind direction from degrees to a cardinal compass direction, such as south or northeast. The template values could then be used with something like conditional cars to create a compass needle indicator that shows the current wind direction, which is probably more user-friendly on a dashboard or display. Or maybe you want to use Home Assistant's sun integration to determine the position of the sun. Once again, the degrees returned by one of the sensor attributes, azimuth in this case, is in degrees, which probably doesn't mean a lot to most people. But once again, you can create a templated sensor and convert the ranges of degrees to something more meaningful, like say dawn, day, or dusk, or night if it isn't one of those three. You can also easily convert a sensor's default units to another value, such as feet to inches. Of course, you can convert other units such as centimeters, millimeters, or meters to seconds, or even something like RGB values to common color names. One nice feature of templated sensors is they don't alter the original sensor value. You have the new template sensor, but the original sensor and its value is also still available for dashboards, automations, or scripts. You can also perform math on multiple sensors, such as summing or averaging them. Do note that while you can build math in a templated sensor, for more advanced math operations, if you have a large number of sensors involved or you want to perform the calculations based on a certain time frame, it's better to use the statistics platform. But the same concept applies, basing a new sensor on the value of one or more other sensors or entities. But with Statistics Platform, you have many additional mathematical operations you can use. I'm not going to go into the details of using the Statistics Platform in this video, but I'll show performing a simple math operation in a template sensor. So how do you get started with templates in Home Assistant? Well, Home Assistant uses a templating language called Jinja 2, and it's similar in syntax to Python, but uses the same basic logic as most programming languages. Now, this might be a bit overwhelming at first, but know that Home Assistant makes an excellent tool available for developing and testing templates. This utility can be found under Developer Tools and then Template. Now, default example template is shown, and we'll come back to this example in a bit more detail after we've created a few sample templates first. So I'll clear this out, but don't worry, you can always restore the original demo example via the provided link here. Do note the additional links at the top that provide access to documentation for both Jinja 2 and Home Assistant templates. In fact, let's take a quick look at the Home Assistant documentation. This page lists some important rules when it comes to templates. When using YAML, the template needs to be enclosed in quotes. And these remaining rules refer to the use of filters to account for things like undefined variables or converting variables to a different data type. I'll cover filters in the upcoming examples. Now note that these rules refer to using YAML. What about using the UI editor? In the UI editor under Helpers, there's an option for Template. If selected, you then choose the type of template entity you want to create. I'll just select a sensor template as an example. Now here under State is where I'd write or paste my Jinja template. So regardless of whether you're using YAML or the UI editor, we need to create the Jinja template in the same manner. Once we create the template, I'll show how to use it in both the YAML and UI editor versions. For a simple starting example, let's take an entity that returns a distance value in feet and create a template entity that shows this value in inches. In this particular case, I have an HCSR04 ultrasonic distance sensor mounted on the ceiling over my car. I can use this distance to determine car presence, but this sensor shows the distance in feet. To create the template sensor to show value in inches, I first need to know the entity name and how the current state is displayed. Under the same Developer Tools area, I can go to States and find my current entity. Here is that HCSR04 sensor. Notice that its state is a numeric value and is being expressed in feet. This is what we want to use to create our template sensor, but showing the value in inches. Back in the template editor, the first thing I like to do is just assure I can get the current state of the entity. Note that the template must be enclosed in these double curly brackets. Next, any entity names must be enclosed in quotes. Now note that when using YAML, your entire template must be quoted as well. So when you do use YAML, you can enclose the template in double quotes and use single quotes for any entity names, or single quote the template and use double quotes for the entity. So when we look at this, I have the correct starting entity value. Now to convert this to inches, I should just be able to multiply the value by 12. But what's going on here? The result is definitely not 4.3 and change times 12. Well, states in Home Assistant are returned as strings or text values by default. In some cases, Home Assistant will implicitly convert a value, but note that the results here even say that the result type is a string. So when multiplying by 12, it's just repeating the same value string 12 times. If we want to perform math or numeric operations on values, we need to use something called a filter in Jinja to convert the value to a number. By adding a vertical bar or a pipe symbol to the original entity means to apply a filter or operation to this value. In this case, I'm converting the value to a floating point decimal, and you can see I have the same result, again expressed as a number. Now I can go ahead and multiply this by 12, and you look over here and you see I'm now getting the correct result. Since the original value is a floating point decimal, my result is also a floating point decimal. But for inches, I really don't need or want the decimal portion, so I can apply another filter to the result of the multiplication. Here I'm taking the result of the calculation and then applying a round filter, which rounds my original 51.98 something something to 52. Do note that the location of the round filter and the use of parentheses is important. If I had placed the round filter here, it would round the entity before multiplying by 12, and you can see this is a different result than when round is applied after multiplication. So be sure to use parentheses as needed, and as a general rule, normal math order of operations will apply to any calculations done in your template. I should also mention, as noted here, the value or state of the template sensor will update anytime the underlying entity value changes. So when the distance changes for the reference sensor, the value of the template sensor will also change. Once we have our template working correctly, we can simply take the template from the editor and we're going to copy that to the clipboard, and now we can return to our helpers. Back over in the Helper UI editor, I've once again selected a template sensor and given it a name. I can now simply paste the template from the clipboard into the state field. Again, down here at the bottom, it shows me a preview of the current state of the entity. If that looks good, I can now go ahead and do things like specify a unit of measure and things like device class or any other properties just like other helpers. Now, if you're using YAML, note that the exact same template is used. But note that the entire template in this case is surrounded by double quotes while the entity is still using single quotes. Regardless of whether you're using the UI editor or YAML, the end result is the same. Back over here in our developer tools under our states, you now see I have two different entities for distance. This is the original entity that again is expressed in feet, and this is our new template entity which expresses that distance in rounded inches. Now let's try that dawn, day, dusk example, which is based on sun's position. I'll go ahead and clear out the template here. But before I try to create a new template using the sun's position, let's check out the sun entity and see what it's using for current state. Back over on the States tab of the Developer Tools, I've located the sun entity, which is part of the sun platform. So the entity name is actually sun.sun. In this case, the state shows whether the sun is above or below the horizon, which isn't what we really need. But there are a couple of attributes that show the sun's position relative to your location. Now, you can use most entity attributes in templates as well, so you aren't necessarily limited to the primary state. While there are attributes available here for things like time of the next dawn or dusk, for this particular example, I'm going to use azimuth. You might think I could use elevation instead, but in this case, that won't work for the type of template entity I want. Now, this video isn't meant to be an astronomy class, but in terms of the Home Assistant Sun entity, elevation returns the angle of the sun relative to the horizon. If the sun is above the horizon, then the value is positive. If below the horizon, it's negative. This is great if you just want to know the angle of the sun above or below the horizon, but it doesn't tell us if the sun is actually rising or setting. If the sun is 5 degrees below the horizon, it could be just before sunrise or just after sunset. There's no way to distinguish from the elevation alone. Azimuth, on the other hand, provides a full 360-degree circle for the sun's position relative to your own. When the sun is at its daytime peak or zenith, the azimuth will be 180 degrees. Now, do know that if you are in the southern hemisphere, north and south may be flipped. But with azimuth, you not only know the sun's position, but whether it is rising or setting. There are multiple dawn and dusk definitions, including civil, nautical, and astronomical, but for this example, I'll use nautical dawn and dusk. So if the sun's position is between 78 and 90 degrees, it's nautical dawn. When between 270 and 282, it's nautical dusk. Between 90 degrees and 270 degrees, it's day. And if the azimuth is none of these three ranges, it's night. To create this template, first again, let's make sure we can just show the entity's attributes and its values. As you can see here, to use an entity's attribute, we use state_attr instead of states. You then specify the entity and the desired attribute, again, both quoted. As you can see, it is returning the current attribute value. But now we need to output different text values based on various ranges of azimuth values. To do this, we'll use an if-then-else structure. One thing you'll notice here is that we're using a curly bracket and a percent sign around each line instead of the double curly brackets. The curly bracket percent sign indicates that the line is a statement, as opposed to the double curly brackets, which indicates an output expression or value. For whichever statement is true, the template will simply output the listed static text, such as dawn or day. So I've specified all my ranges as I covered before, and as you can see from the result, the correct value is being returned based on the sun's current azimuth at my location. Now that it's correct, I can once again copy this template and simply go over to the UI editor and paste that template into the state field. Once again, if I scroll down, you'll see it is properly returning day, which is the current stage based on the azimuth reading. Do note that if you're using YAML to create your templated entities, you do need to reload the template entities or restart Home Assistant, but then the new entity will be available and you can display it on a dashboard, or you can even use something like day, dawn, dusk, or night in automations as a trigger or condition. Once created, template entities can be used just like any other entity. Let's go ahead and clear this out and try one more example I initially showed, converting wind-bearing values to cardinal directions, which, as you'll see, is very similar to how we created the template using azimuth. First, I'll once again locate the entity I'll be using in the template. I'm using Open Weather Map, and you can see I get the current wind bearing in degrees as the state. This will be the entity that I use. Once again, let's start by just pulling in the entity. As you can see, this works, and I am getting the current entity value. Now, in this case, I did go ahead and apply a filter to assure the entity's value is treated as a numeric. Home Assistant may attempt to implicitly convert your values for you. Note that I didn't use any filters when I was doing the template for azimuth, but you can always assure the proper data type by using a filter. Now that I have this working, I can create the ranges in much the same manner as I did the sun template. Once again, I'm using a series of if-then-else statements to return a particular cardinal text value. Now do note if your template becomes too large to see, you can simply pop this out to see a larger view. But this is more or less the same thing we did with the sun sensor, except there are a few more else-if statements, so it covers all 8 main cardinal directions. And if desired, you could fine-tune these ranges even further and also return values like north-northeast or west-southwest. But from the result output, I can see that I'm getting the correct result, and naturally this is a string value. With that, I can simply copy-paste the template into the template helper state field or paste it into YAML. So with these few examples created, let's take a quick look at a sample dashboard. Here you can see examples of a templated entity versus the original entity state as shown on a dashboard. For our first distance conversion, recall that the original sensor shows the distance in feet, but our template sensor displays that same distance in inches. Again, note that when we create a template entity based on another entity, both the original and template entities are available for use. Under the sun example, again you can see the original azimuth value, which is currently 199 degrees, which probably doesn't mean a lot to most people. But the template entity converts that to a more meaningful value. In this case, 199 degrees means it's day. While I have my template defined to just show dawn, day, dusk, or night, again you could break this down even further to something like morning, afternoon, and evening as well. For the wind example, I'm showing the original wind bearing degrees, which is currently 315 degrees. Then the templated entity converts this to one of the 8 cardinal directions. Next to that is a series of conditional cards that will change the compass needle to point to the cardinal direction anytime the wind direction changes. If you want to know more about how to use conditional cards, I do have another Home Assistant 101 video that covers how to create and use conditional cards on your dashboards. But this is just a couple of simple examples of how you can create template entities for better dashboard and display purposes. I did mention earlier that you can perform math in a template. Here's a simple example where I want to add the value of 2 entities to create an entity that is the sum of both. So I've started out by pulling in 2 different entities here that report wattage. As a side note, a template can output more than one value, but not when used as the state for a template sensor helper. But if I add these 2 together to get a total wattage, I can then use it as a source for a template entity. When added together, we would expect to get 17. When I do that, the result is showing 161. Why and where is that value coming from? Well, it treated each of these entities as a string and just concatenated the string values of 16 and 1 together instead of adding them. This is where we need the filters. By adding the int filter to both entities, it assures the values are treated as integers when adding, and you can see I'm now getting the proper result. So while Home Assistant can implicitly convert values in some situations, it's recommended to explicitly provide a filter for the data type when working with numeric values. Again, if using more than just a couple of entities or you want to perform more advanced math, you should look into the statistics platform, but as shown here, you can do math within the template definition. But now that you have a bit more understanding of templates and Jinja, let's restore this original example and take a look. Briefly, there is a JSON variable being defined at the top. The next line outputs some static text and the JSON values, which you see over here saying the temperature is 25 degrees C. Next, it's outputting the sunrise time using an if-then block to change the output based on whether the sun has risen or not. In this case, the output is saying the sun rose 8 hours ago. Next is just some static text followed by a loop that gets the current open weather map conditions, and you can see over here it says the open weather map is partly cloudy. Note from this example, like the wattage example I just showed, multiple values are being output from this single template. Now, you probably wouldn't do this for something like a sensor, which expects just a single state value, but you might do something as part of an automation or script. Time prevents me from going into depth on using templates and automations, but here are just a couple of simple examples pulled from my own automations. First, I'm using a template in an automation condition to limit the time of this automation to between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, this is certainly not the only way, but I wanted to show it using a template for this video. If using the UI editor, I simply select template for the condition and paste in the exact same template except for the double quote marks. And remember, you can use that template editor under the developer tools to test and develop your template until it's correct, then just copy and paste it into the UI editor or your own YAML. In a similar manner, I can use a template in the action of an automation or script. In this case, I'm executing a different script based on the current state of an input Boolean helper. While the Home Assistant folks have been rapidly expanding the use of templates via the UI editor, there are still some situations where you have to flip over to YAML mode in the UI editor to perform some more advanced functions that aren't yet available directly in the editor. Again, I don't use the UI editor myself, so there may be other ways now or in the future, but I can still always paste the generated YAML from the template developer tool into the UI editor or into my own YAML. I've only scratched the surface with the ways that you can use templates in Home Assistant. Jinja is very powerful with a lot of features, and you can even do things like define and use local variables in your templates. For example, here's that original template again for the wind bearing. And instead of using the state of the wind bearing entity over and over, I could have created the wind direction sensor using a variable for the current wind direction, and then using the shorter variable name when comparing the value of the entity. The end result is exactly the same. Again, if you want to see all the various Jinja options and additional ways you can use templates in Home Assistant, be sure to check out the links in the video description. Well, that's going to do it for this video highlighting the uses of templates in Home Assistant. I'll be back soon with more videos on Home Assistant, DIY electronics, and LEDs. But until that time, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.